really quickly, I'm just riffing. I've done these kinds of webinars with photographers before, and oftentimes they'll provide me with their intro blurb, what I'm supposed to read to, tell you who they are. Matt's one of my closest friends. I've known him for over a decade now. And here's the thing about Matt that you might not know is that, yeah, he's kind of done a ton in landscape. And over the past few years, he's transitioned more to the wildlife photography side of things, which I'm sure a lot of you are interested in. But if you were to ask Matt, hey, Matt, what do you do? Or what are you? He wouldn't say he's a professional photographer. He'd say he's a photo educator. And that's the thing that I love most, is that all he cares about is helping others improve their photography. And whereas so many photographers, I think, tend to kind of veer towards overcomplicating things, making things more kludgier than they really need to be, Matt's the kind of person who's like, no, listen, this is the way to do it. It's super easy.
Let's keep it easy.
Let's keep it easy. Let's not sweat the small stuff. So with that, Matt, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to mute myself and stop my video. You can share your screen. Hillary and I are going to be in the questions module. Just everyone here, I see all the chat's blowing up. So thank you for that. And so there you go, Matt. Let me go ahead and stop my stuff.
All right. I think they should see my screen at this point. So we'll,
yep, you're good.
All right, we'll go ahead and get going. Well, thank you for the introduction, Brian and Hillary, and everybody who joined us. All, gosh, it's almost 700 people so far, and it's climbing, so it's great to see. So here's the deal. I started using Topaz products probably a year and a half ago. I actually started using them way before I ever really started talking about them, because I was really dabbling, and it all came from, and you're gonna actually see the photo that got me, that really turned me on, but it all came from the fact that I had photos that looked like, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit on the image that you see here, but I had photos that looked like this, and I thought to myself, all right, if I can get them to look like this, I'm sold. Because this is how everybody's photos that I see online look. You know, we don't always have to zoom in quite as much, but even when it's zoomed out, you can still see that there's a bunch of noise and green and everything in the photo. But I would always see these photos online, and I'd always hear people talk about using Topaz, and I just kind of dug my heels in, like, no, I don't need it, you know. And then I went on a trip, and a lot of my photos were very high ISO, very low light, and I was very, very disappointed in the results. And I started realizing, like, this is the tool everybody uses. You know, this is a very sharp photo right out of the camera. I started using Sharpen AI. Again, I thought if I could have my photo from this to that, which is, it's not, you know, night and day, but it does sharpen it up nicely, and it removed the noise. And you're gonna see this whole workflow as we go here. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go over workflow. I'm gonna start in Lightroom. I'm not gonna go over Lightroom noise reduction and sharpening. This is Topaz Adobe workflow. So I'll start in Lightroom, I'll use Topaz, and then I'll use Lightroom and jump to Photoshop, and then use Topaz. I'll do that for noise reduction, I'll do it for sharpening, and then at the end we'll talk about how my workflow would be for Topaz Gigapixel, okay? So let's go ahead and get started here. Let me close these, jump over to Lightroom. So this is the photo. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably even seen me demonstrate this photo, but I'm gonna do it again because this is actually what sold me. Because I battled with this photo for a long time. It was taken in Costa Rica. It was always one of my favorite monkey photos. Yeah, there's a little branch hanging down and everything, but this is the rainforest, you know. This wasn't any type of a sanctuary where the monkeys are kind of brought out for you. It's a rainforest, so I'm fairly forgiving on some things, and if I needed to, I could get rid of that in Photoshop probably. But I just love the photo. I love the look. I love the connection of it. And as you get in, if I wanted to share it online, which I'd probably want to share it online, maybe this size, maybe just a hair zoomed in. And as I start to zoom in, you can start to see the problem with it. Okay, and I played with the sharpening and the noise reduction all to my heart's content. I could not get it to where I wanted it to, okay? Because as soon as I started doing noise reduction on it, I started making it look like a painting, You know, if you're like blinking your eyes, looking like there's some kind of film over the screen, that's exactly it. Like it looks blurry. So I was never able to get it there. So that was my first trip over into Topaz. So I'll go ahead and do that. Again, we're inside of Lightroom. You would do your basic panel stuff, which in this case I just did some exposure, pull back a little bit on some of those bright highlights in the background there, and then some shadow. You know, probably right around there. All right. So nothing too crazy. I mean, you can see what, 3-4 adjustments that I made here on the basic panel, and that's really all I had to do to the photo. It integrates right with Lightroom. So when you install a Topaz product, whether it's DeNoise, Sharpen, or Gigapixel, they integrate by default when you install them. So in my case here, I want to jump over to DeNoise because I don't have a reason to go to Photoshop for this photo. I guess we could argue I could remove the branch, but we'll do that in another example. So I don't have a reason to go to Photoshop, so I wouldn't just go to Photoshop just to go to Photoshop. So I'll come over here, Photo Edit In, and that's where you would usually make your jump over to Photoshop, but you'll see all your plugins get listed inside of the list here, and you can see DeNoise AI right there. So I'll click on that. It's going to ask me if I want to make a copy. Because it's a raw photo, I don't have any other choices. You can't edit a raw photo. You have to make a copy of it. So in this case, I'm going to edit a copy. I'm going to take the Lightroom defaults that you can see on the screen here and just click on edit. And so it's going to make that copy. You're actually probably going to see it make the copy down there in the film strip. You should see another version of it show up. And it's going to open up Topaz as a plugin into Lightroom, which it's almost like Photoshop, right? It makes a copy of your photo and you jump over to Photoshop. So the same thing here. Instead of Photoshop, now we're over in DeNoise. So you've got a couple of things here, and again, I want to make this more about workflow. There's lots of tutorials out there that go into the specifics of how to use every single setting, and thankfully there's not a lot of settings that we have to use here. So I want to make it more about workflow. One of the things I'll generally do is zoom in to at least 200% as I'm evaluating this. Okay, it's a little bit aggressive, but I'd rather at least judge it at 200%. It always gets better the more you zoom out. It always tends to look a little bit better. And then we'll go in here and you can see there's a couple of settings over here. There's some AI models. So there's standard, clear, low light, and severe. Standard is the one that I use the most. That's, standard is standard. Clear is probably the second most used for me. But standard is probably going to be where I land most of the time. And then you come down here to settings and there's a little auto button, and I got to be honest with you, most of the time I just click auto. I don't want this to take a long time. I don't need it to take a long time, and I don't spend a long time on it. Okay, that's why I it's got AI built into it. It's looking at I assume the settings. I assume it's looking at some part of the photo too, and combining those things and determining what my settings should be. And those engineers are a lot smarter than I am. So I think always does a great job. You can override that. There's basically two settings: remove noise, enhance sharpness. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth as we go along, especially as we get into some other examples here. But a common question about workflow is, so do I do noise reduction first and then sharpening, or sharpening first and then noise reduction? So one of the reasons why what drew me to Topaz's plugins was that I don't have to think about it. If I feel the noise is worse than anything, then I do noise reduction and it does really good sharpening. If I feel sharpening needs the most help, then I do sharpening, which also does noise reduction. So I never really have to use both of them together. I generally only use just one program because it does both. All right. Now, the other thing that I do quite a bit in here is I might want to compare it with other ones, because this one actually does have some pretty severe noise. Some of these other AI models might work better. And so before I found this feature a while ago, I would click on a different model and then I have to wait for the preview to render again. And then I'd click on another one and be like, is that better? Is that better? But if you come up here to view, you could go down and you could see there's something called comparison view. So in comparison view, that's going to split this into 4 different sections on your screen here. So I'll kind of move this over to where I can see some details. And now I get to see what all 4 of these look like with each other, which is pretty cool. So, and then you got standard. This one will show you clear. There's low light. If there are 4 models and you're only going to see 3 previews, if you want to change one, you can click on that quadrant, and then you can go and just click on, in this case, I'll click on the one that wasn't represented, which was severe noise. Okay. So after eyeballing this, after looking at them, I'm probably somewhere between standard and the clear models. I think clear is actually holding the detail pretty well here. So I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to go back to view. I'm just going to go back here to the single view. And then again, I'm just going to click auto for my settings there. So it just usually takes a few seconds for it to update. But you can click and you can see the original and then the after. So before, after. Before, after. To me, what I see is I'm getting rid of all of the noise, especially in the background here, but I'm also getting rid of a lot of the noise on the monkey, but it's keeping the details. It's keeping the fur. It's not blurring them, which a lot of other noise reduction methods tend to do. It makes it look like a painting. Okay. All right. So from here, nothing else I really have to do. I'll click apply. And that will go ahead and that'll process that image, it'll apply it, and it'll save those changes as we flip back over here to Lightroom Classic. Eventually. It's a great time to take a sip of water. But it'll save those changes back to Lightroom Classic. So you'll see that you already saw when I went over there, you already saw that there was a duplicate copy made as I went into Topaz, and now it's saving these changes to that duplicate copy. So that'll be my new version of the photo back inside of Lightroom. So I won't, unless I need to go back and reprocess the photo as the original, I'll be able to just take that forward going forward. If I'm going to save it as a JPEG, if I'm going to print it, that's going to be my actual copy of the photo. Okay, so there we go. So let's go, we can take a look over here and we can see, so there is my raw photo. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. There's my raw photo, and then there is my edited photo. You're never going to get rid of all the noise. You'll never ever see it if I don't zoom in to that percentage level, right? If I zoom into more something like this, see a little bit of it, but nowhere near as bad as it was before. And the beauty of it is it keeps, this is what drew me to it. It keeps the detail. It gets rid of the noise on fur and feathers, as you're going to see next, and it keeps the detail. That's the most important part to me, is that I'm able to keep all that detail, and the graininess just goes away. So let's switch over to another one here. So I got this juvenile eagle that's just about to take off from a branch. If I were to go take a look at the histogram here, so you could see ISO 5000. Okay, so 5000 ISO. If I zoom in, something like there, you can really start to see the noise. If I zoom in another level, you'll definitely start to see the noise. If you want to see the detail here, I'll just leave Lightroom's defaults, which is very, very minimal. It gets rid of a little color noise. It tends to just add a little bit of sharpening to it, but not much worth seeing. But it doesn't do anything to the luminance noise, which is what's left here, which is what we see. That's all that little grainy stuff that you see on here. So if I go one level deeper, and this is video, so if you're like, why are you zooming in so much? It's just, it's harder to see in video. Which is why I always generally zoom in a video tutorial more than I would ever zoom in real life. I can, in real life, I can actually see the noise really well here, but you guys probably can't just because of video compression. So here's the workflow. All right, because I already know I want to jump to Photoshop for this photo. I've got this little string hanging down here. I already know I'm going to jump to Photoshop. So essentially what I'll do is I'll just do basic Lightroom edits. Sometimes I click auto and it does a really good job. I'll override auto here and maybe boost that exposure up just a little bit. like so. One little trick that I'll do, and I will do this first before I did any noise reduction or sharpening. I'm going to zoom in on the eyes. I'm going to grab my radial filter and add a little bit of exposure, a little bit of whites to it, and then just pop a little bit of whites, a little bit of brightening on the eye. Nothing too crazy. Same thing over there. It's subtle, but it just helps the eyes stand out a little bit. Okay, might be too much, so I can always dial it back a bit. All right. At this point, I've done my Lightroom stuff to the photo, so now I'm ready to jump. And I want to do noise reduction. I already know I want to do noise reduction. I've decided that the photo is plenty sharp. Sharpness is not an issue for this photo. Noise is the predominant issue here. Okay. So I've already identified I want to do noise reduction, but I also know that I want to do some distraction removal, which means I'm going to go to Photoshop first. So photo, edit in Photoshop. And that'll, again, this is a raw file, so it's going to make a copy based on your Lightroom preferences, which are, you've got external editing preference in Lightroom. I keep them at their defaults. It's going to make a copy and jump us over into Photoshop. So once we're there, I'll usually make a duplicate copy of the layer, all right? Just so that I have my original below in case I ever need to get back to it. So I just press Command or Control J. Command J on the Mac or Control J on the PC, and I'll make a duplicate copy of the layer. From there, I'll Command Control Plus to zoom in, and I just want to get rid of these little guys here. Probably a quick tool to do that would be the healing brush. So I'll go over here. J is the keyboard shortcut. And if you ever can't find a tool, there's a little search icon in the top right of Photoshop. You can click on that and type in the tool there, and it'll point to it in Photoshop. And then I'm going to use the replace mode up here, which is going to give me a little bit of a smoother edge to it. And I Option or Alt click. That's the thing with the healing brushes. You have to tell it what you want to heal with. All right, so I Option or Alt click, hold down the Option or Alt key, click, let go, and then paint. All right. Option or Alt click, paint, Option or Alt click, paint, sample, paint, and Command or Control Plus to zoom way, way in. Use a little bit of a smaller brush, sample one last time, and I can get really close to that edge. Okay. All right. So that takes care of removing the distractions. From there, now I'm ready to do my noise reduction. So filter, come down here. You can see Topaz Labs, and you'll see DeNoise AI appears there. So I don't need to go back to Lightroom to do this. I can do it straight from Photoshop. I actually like to do it right from Photoshop because I've got layers and masking and all that stuff. And Topaz does have masking inside of it if you went over there from Lightroom. But I've been using Photoshop for a long, long time, and I'm just always more comfortable there. So if I can do any layering or masking there, that's where I'm going to get it done. Just like before, I'll come up to my view, change it to comparison view, get that into place, and then just let all of my updates, all of my little quadrants update to see which one I like the most. So I'm thinking low light, not bad. I'm actually liking the sharpness of either standard or clear better. For me, I actually see a little bit better, and it's negligible. You guys, it's probably impossible for you to see on live internet streaming video. I can see a negligible difference inside of AI Clear. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that one as the one that I want to use here. And then we'll go and we'll click apply just like we did before. I don't really need to do anything else. We'll click apply. I'll be able to show you. It'll be easier to see the before and after once I actually apply it. So this time it's processing the changes that I just did here. But remember, we started from Photoshop and I had it on a layer. So this time when I go back, it's actually just going to go back to that layer on Photoshop. So remember, we're not back inside of Lightroom yet. We came into here from Photoshop. So if, just to reiterate the workflow, if you don't need Photoshop, just go there from Lightroom. I'm not going to bother making a trip to Photoshop just to go into the plugin. But if you do need Photoshop, do that work first. And I'm generally going to do my noise reduction and sharpening last. And as you saw here, it does a really good job at sharpening. I'll be able to show you the before and after in just a second here. There we go. All right, so let's zoom in and take a look. So before, after, before, after. So you can really see it. See a lot of that background noise. Okay. And then you can even take a look at the eyes. And there is a little bit of sharpening going on here. But to me, for me, and God, keep in mind, we're zoomed into 300%. So you're nobody's ever going to see your photo at this level, nor should they. But to me, the magic behind this is this texture. Okay, it should not be smooth. I don't want it to get smooth. That's how, people will send, I have a Facebook group and people will send in photos all the time. And I'll always have to say, hey, so-and-so, hold up on the Topaz DeNoise. And somebody will always comment and say, how did you know that they use Topaz DeNoise? Because it looks like a painting. So you should have texture. And that's why I love it. Look at it. I'm able to get rid of the graininess, but I still keep the texture that makes this look like it looks. And when you see it at a normal level, which this is more of a normal level, right? This is 100%. When you see it at a normal level, it looks great. That texture is what makes it look good, and it doesn't look like a painting. Okay, this is, in fact, if I were to share this, this is really, that's probably the size that I would really share it at. But if I were to do a big print, somebody would be able to get in a little bit closer to that. Okay. All right, and then we came from Lightroom, so all we have to do is hit File, Save. That will save our copy. And then when we close it and we return to Lightroom, now we're going to see, just like we did when we went from Lightroom into Topaz, this time we went from Photoshop to Topaz. So now you can see down there in the film strip, you can see you've got your original and then you've got your edited version right next to it. So that's the workflow for noise reduction. And as I said, with my noise reduction, I typically don't have to sharpen because it's sharpening for me. It's already doing sharpening and I have no reason to go in there and do extra sharpening. So I very, very rarely would ever do both. If I had to do both, I would have just added a sharpening step on top of what you just saw. But again, it's 99% of the time I don't have to. So from there, let's move over to, that's noise reduction. Now let's move over to sharpening. So what means from a workflow perspective, when I look at something, when do I think, okay, I don't want to do noise reduction, I want to do sharpening. So I'll Command or Control plus to zoom in here inside of Lightroom. So here's the deal. As I look at this, and this is a skill I think you'll develop over time. I look at this and I think it's sharp. I know it can be just a little bit more crisp. Okay, I know it can be a little bit more crisp. It's got a little bit of noise, but I know that sharpening will also take care of that noise and get rid of that noise reduction. But I know sharpening is what I want to do first on this. And one of the things I can also do, sometimes I'll come down to the noise reduction tab. And if I take this up to about 25 or so and I see that noise go away, I know that the noise is negligible, right? And in this case, 25, 30%, that noise goes away. All right. So I know the noise is negligible and sharpening is going to take care of it for me, and sharpening is going to be where I get the most bang for my buck. So come over here to develop. First things first, I'm going to go to the crop tool. I need to rotate this around a little bit and then crop in on the action like so. If I have a specific output size, I'll crop to that. If you're printing, if you're saving it for something, then you would know what that output is, and you should crop to that output, that aspect ratio. From here, I'll probably just do a little bit of exposure, a little bit of contrast, a little bit on the whites, a little bit on the black. It doesn't really need anything. It's, to me, I think it was actually looking really good, almost straight out of the camera there. Okay, so nothing too crazy on our toning settings. So again, with this one, I don't really have any distractions or any need to go to Photoshop. So I would just go Photo, Edit in, and this time I'm going to do Sharpen AI. Same thing as before, it's going to make a copy. I choose the defaults that it does there. Just hit Edit. Now it's going to pop open Sharpen AI. And as it's doing that, you're going to see a duplicate copy appear down here in the film strip. Remember, it's a raw photo. It's got to make a copy of it. I think it went away, but trust me, it made a copy. All right, so same thing as before. Zoom in probably about 200% or so. Sharpen AI has the same thing, same basic settings, same basic layout, same everything as DeNoise. So if you want to keep your one-up view here, you can go to image quality, and what it's going to do is just detect what it thinks is the problem with the photo. So you've got motion blur, you've got out of focus, or just too soft. And I think it did great because I know there's not really motion blur. I know it's not really out of focus. I think I might have picked up on a water drop, but they're so close that this is still pretty good. But it went with the too soft one. And then you've got very noisy, very blurry, or just normal. Since there was a decent amount of noise in there, I went with the very noisy option. I'm going to come up here and hit Update Preview. Oh, and then settings, just turn on Auto and hit Update Preview at the top. That is a preference, by the way. So if you go over here into your preferences, it's going to be under your Topaz menu, I believe the Edit menu on a PC. But if you go into your preferences, you've got preferences for Auto Update Preview. So I auto update the preview default in DeNoise. Sharpen takes a little bit longer, although it has gotten a lot faster lately, so I might go back and change that. But I changed Sharpen to make it so I had to update the preview. All right, so let's click on our original. So that's before and that's after. So not too much of a change here with too soft. So let's try out of focus, because that was one of the issues there. Or in fact, let's just make it easy on ourselves and go into comparison view. There we go. Go into comparison view and hit update. And let's just see what all three of them look like. So we've got motion blur in the top right, out of focus in the bottom left, and then too soft in the bottom right. So it's updated all of them. From my eyes, I can see that top right motion blur is actually seems to be doing a better job. So let's go ahead and click on that, change to one up view. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom in one more level. I'm going to hit that update preview just so you can see it. I'm not going to let this one render because it takes a minute and it's just me talking to you while it does all of its rendering. But that's before, that's after. Before, after. Pretty amazing. Let's go back to 200% here. Again, I'll hit update preview again. So you can see it gets rid of all that noisiness in the background. All that green is gone. And it does a really nice job on the water drops and does a really nice job of keeping the texture on the reddish egret here. Or no, egret. Did I egret? Egret? Red heron. Or egret? Heron? I don't know. I think it's a reddish heron. Or egret. It's one of the two. Anyway, so
it's a blue-breasted pickle feather.
It's a blue-breasted pickle feather. Yes, that's exactly what Brian and I make up bird names when we talk to each other. But anyway, when you look at the difference before and after, you can see not only does it sharpen up all those details on the feathers and the texture, just does a really nice job overall with everything. Okay, you would normally hit apply. That would take you back to Lightroom, but as we know, that takes a minute or so, so I'm going to skip that part. And then just like before, so let's continue with the workflow of I know I'm going to do sharpen. All right, I've identified that sharpening is what I want to do more for this photo, knowing that it'll get rid of the noise as well, because the noise is not a dominant issue here. So I know that I want to do some sharpness, so I'm going to go do all my Lightroom stuff first. So we'll do a little bit of cropping. Right there. That looks pretty good. I'll hit auto. Let's see what auto does. Yeah, it's not bad. I find auto on wildlife is always a little hot on the whites. So I always have to pull back the whites a bit. And it always wants to make my blacks. For me personally, it makes my blacks a little bit too black, but I think that's looking pretty good right about there. And so I want to go to Photoshop for this because I have one problem, and that is I couldn't avoid it because I gotta crop this, and I gotta get this guy out of the background there. I gotta crop it, but it's a little bit too tight on the left hand side here, and I have a trick for this, so that's why we're going to go to Photoshop. So photo, edit in Photoshop, it'll get over there. Did anybody post that? I know what bird it is. I don't know why it's escaping me, if it's a red heron or a red egret. I think it's a red egret. But
Tina says it's a reddish egret. Oh, actually,
reddish egret. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I don't know why it's escaping me. Like I've photographed
there we go.
100 times.
We have positive confirmation. Bill, Roberta, Donna, Virginia.
There we go. All right. So I'm here inside of Photoshop. Photoshop's got a really cool tool if you've got the right background for it. It needs the right background, which is going to be fairly continuous toned. But it's got a really powerful tool, and that is if we go to the crop tool, you just hit the letter C, you're going to see a little option up in the top called Content Aware. And so in Content Aware, when I turn that on, when I crop, I can actually expand. Rather than crop in, I can expand it, hit that little checkbox, and Photoshop is going to go through and it's going to fill that area. Again, you need the right background for it. It's not going to work on everything, but man, I'm telling you, that has saved me so many times from clipped wings or wings that were almost clipped and too uncomfortably close to the edge of the photo. Okay, so we went in there, we did our Photoshop work just like before. I press Command or Control J, make a copy of my layer, filter, Topaz, sharpen. Now it's going to pop over into the Sharpening plugin. I'm going to use what we learned from before, which was, even though it said too soft, my guess is if I turn on auto, the auto is going out of focus this time. So let's see what it does. Let's zoom in 200%. Hit update. Take a look at what it does here. There you go. Before, after. Before, after. It's negligible, right? Not every photo needs to be crazily sharpened. This is what I do on my photography that's good. Like, it has some ISO, has a little bit of noise, good photography, sharp photo, a little bit of sharpening right at the end of it just to really, really make it pop. Okay, and I'm going to show you a really blurry example in just a second here. So not too much that we have to do here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cancel out of here because I'm going to show you a more in-depth example next. But just assume, once I hit save, I would have to, just like we did before, come over to Photoshop and hit File, Save, and that would return me to Lightroom. But let's close that one. I just want to show you one quick example of, you got blurry. So here I was panning, and I was obviously not doing very good at it. So I was trying to pan and trying to get a little bit of background blur. Panning at a slower shutter speed, so 1/200th of a second here. Trying to get a little bit of background blur, and you can see I did not nail it. Okay, so never happy when this happens, but if you have one of those photos where you really, really want to salvage that, okay, I'm going to tell you to do two things. Number one, I would start from Photoshop. All right, I'm going to show you why in a second, but I'm going to make a copy of this and jump over to Photoshop, and then press Command or Control J to make a copy of the layer. You're going to see why in a second. We're going to go Filter, Sharpen, pop open there. You can almost guarantee what method we would want to use, right? Like what's our problem? So let's zoom in a little bit more here, 200%. So I'm gonna click auto, and you see it said out of focus. All right, you know what? Just for sake of trying it, I'm gonna let the out of focus one run. So that's out of focus. I actually think motion blur was more of the problem here. So let's hit update preview on that one. And I believe that's the one I used, and you're gonna see it. You're gonna see it snap in just a sec. Look at that. So motion blur definitely was the one to use here. Before, after. Again, before, after. So I am going to apply this one because I want to show you what's going to happen here in a second. And this is pretty common with a really, really blurry photo, what you're going to see. And you can even start to see, look up here in the water. See where it's really blurry here, and then see where it tried to sharpen it here. And you'll start to see that on super blurry photos. It's doing a good job of sharpening the subject, but at the same time, it's also going in there and sharpening some of the background too, which can be good in some cases, especially if there were other birds in the background, they would get sharper. But in this case, I don't want that water to get sharp. That water was supposed to be out of focus. So we don't want any sharpening taking place. But first off, guys, would this hold up if I wanted to crop in to this and share it big on a web page or Instagram? Probably not. That's not what this is for. This is for saving a photo, all right? And that is an acceptable quality. Before, after. I'll even go a couple levels deeper. Before, after. So that is perfectly acceptable if I were to try to share it at this size, which is about the size I would want to share it, right? I want to try to keep some of the environment in there. But here's why I made the copy, why I went to Photoshop. Because now I can use masking to get the background from before, from that bottom layer. And the easy way to do it, go up to the select menu, choose select subject, put the selection around my subject. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to notice if it's not. And then I come down here to the layer mask button. It's all the way at the bottom. I'm trying to hover my cursor over it right next to the FX icon. Layer mask, because I have a selection, it's automatically going to hide everything else on that layer. So now I have the best of both worlds. I have the blurry background from the bottom photo, but I have the sharp foreground from the top photo. And then you can just use your brushes on the layer mask. If it did mess up like it did here, you can just use your brush on the layer mask and paint out any of those areas. You paint with black, you paint with white. I always tell people, 50-50 guess. Try black. If it doesn't work, try white. Keeps it simple. Okay? Just like before, we hit File, Save, and that'll take us back over into Photoshop. Okay? Or take us back over into Lightroom with the copy of our photo. And then the last piece of this puzzle, as we're talking about the full range of the Topaz products that I use, the last piece of this puzzle is Gigapixel, which is for upsizing. Okay, so workflow, you're gonna do your Lightroom stuff first. You're gonna do your raw edits first, so you can see not too much I did here. You're going to do your raw edits first. And then I'm going to zoom into this. To me, this is a noise issue. Okay, it's a sharp photo. It just has a good amount of noise in it. So from a workflow perspective, you're going to do your noise reduction. You're going to do any other type of Photoshop work that you may need to do with it. So I would go over here, Photo Edit In, and I would go down here to DeNoise AI, hit Edit. It's going to pop open in DeNoise. And once it does, we will, come on, you can do it. There we go. I've got my 4-up view here, and let's just let all of them render, see which one that we like the most. So I'm kind of torn between standard and clear. I'm going to go standard. I'm going to override it. Guys, don't be afraid. I'll crank up that sharpness. Like, don't be afraid. One thing that's nice about Topaz is I found that you really can't get into too much trouble, especially if you still see some noise artifacts in the background. You don't have to change the noise from 14 to 40. You could change the noise from 14 to 20, and you'd be amazed at what that will do if you still saw any little noisy clusters or artifacts in the background there. So I would go in here and I would do my noise reduction. Okay, hit apply. That's going to go through and apply the whole thing. And then only at the point where I was ready to do something with the photo big, because that's where Gigapixel comes in. Gigapixel is an upsizing program. Gigapixel is meant to upsize your photo. So what are the cases where you would want to upsize your photo? One, a big print. You either cropped away a lot of your photo, and you want to print a 20 by 30 or 40 by 60 or something like that, or you have an older photo without a big megapixel camera and you need to upsize that, and to the point where maybe you can print it. So maybe you took it back, when you were shooting a 20 megapixel camera or an 18 megapixel camera, and you want to upsize that to be able to print it at a very larger size. But the one thing that I'll caution you to is don't get into the habit. I'm going to show you when we get back over into Lightroom here. Okay. And we can take a look at our before and after. All right, so there's our before photo. There's our after. Before, after. So not only did it get rid of all that noise, but it did a really nice job of sharpening and keeping everything sharp. Here's what I see a lot of people try to do, and I just want to try to warn you against it. That is, you can't, when you do this, okay, if you're going to crop this far in on your photo and you start to get it to the size of a screen, it's already becoming pixelated. All right, just looking at it without enlarging it, it's become pixelated. If you think you can 4x the size of this and it'll be sharp, you remember, it's the quality going in is the quality going out. So when I use Gigapixel, it's because I have a good quality photo that I just need to print bigger than the resolution will allow. Don't use Gigapixel to try to take a crappy quality photo and make it a bigger crappy quality photo, because that's what you're going to get from it. And so you're probably not going to get the results you want. It will get pixelated. But from a workflow perspective, I went in, did my noise reduction, okay? And again, it did the sharpening for me. Let's go back. There we go. So now let's just say I want to print this at a size that this is not big enough for. Now I would go and do Gigapixel. All right. Same thing as before. It's going to ask you, do you want to make a copy? I do. I have a very specific need for upsizing, and I'm only going to use this for that. Chances are you don't need it as the main copy of your photo that you're going to share on Instagram or share to the web. So I'm usually going to make a copy of it. It's going to pop open into Gigapixel, and the interface has a lot to it, and I'd say if I learned anything from using this, it's keep it simple. Okay? So just decide how big you want it, 2x, 4x, 6x, or you can go to a specific width and height of what you're going to scale it to. So most of the time, I'm just going to use the quick 2x, 4x, 6x. From there is AI involved in this. So what AI model do you want to use? Again, standard is going to be almost all the time of what I'm using. If you did start with a very low resolution image, 1,000 pixels, 2,000 pixels, that would be a place to go. And then it'll also do some noise reduction and sharpening for you. I'm still going to do the bulk of my noise reduction or sharpening before I get here. Okay, this is just on the photo after you do the upsizing. So if you're thinking you're going to make this your noise reduction and sharpening step, I would keep away from that. All right, but that's not too much more to go over from the settings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel out of here, because the one thing I'll say is Gigapixel takes a little while to run. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I actually saved a comparison. I think it was one of the images we saw before. So I saved a comparison, and what I did is I opened up the original photo in Photoshop, and I used Photoshop's image size, which is usually what I'll use. If I have a small upsize to do, if I only want to 2x the photo, I'll actually generally use Photoshop. I think Photoshop is really good up to about 200 to 300% of upsizing. Okay. From there, if I'm going to go over that, now I'm going to start to look at Gigapixel 4. All right. So all I did was I opened up the original photo in Photoshop and I went to image size, and then it was much smaller at the time. Okay. And then I just did times 4, because you can do math inside those little text fields there. All right. So I just did times 4 to upsize it 4 times. And then I ran a copy of it on Gigapixel and I upsized that 4 times. And I just overlaid them together. So I just want to show you a comparison here. So again, this is 20,000 pixels wide, but let's take a look. So here's 100% view. This is the Photoshop version. This is the Gigapixel version. Photoshop, Gigapixel. Take a look over here on some of the details. Photoshop, Gigapixel. All right. A lot of people will talk about halos or artifacts around the edges. You know what, guys? You're only going to see them if you zoom way, way in on your photo. Nobody will ever zoom that far in on your photo, so when they look at it this way, they'll never see it. And if you were to print, there's no way in the world that that little line will ever be seen. Your print will smooth that out. Okay. So, but there's definitely a difference there. I will tell you, in my resizing tests, Gigapixel wins every time. Am I going to tell you I use it all the time? No, because I generally don't have to 4x the size of my images. So if I only had to, upsize this by 100, 200%, I'd have probably just used Photoshop for it. But you can see, I mean, at 4x, Gigapixel is pretty much a clear winner on that stuff there. But again, I generally don't have to do that, and I find Photoshop will do a good enough job for me at the percentages that I normally have to do for.